Adirondack guide, naturalist, and writer Ed Kanze is with us this week at the Roundtable. Nice to see you again. Welcome.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. Certainly many of our viewers here at Mountain Lake PBS know you and love to listen to your All Things Natural podcast. And if you folks haven't found them or listened to them, they are wonderful. You can find them on our website at mountainlake.org. And much like your weekly newspaper column, you make observations about nature and wildlife that really aren't for the avid outdoorsman or nature lover. They're really for the average folks that can appreciate nature and I think they can really identify with the segments that you do.
Yeah, thanks. I've always wanted, as a nature writer, not to sort of preach to the choir, but to write about nature and take it from a humorous angle in a way that might interest people who normally wouldn't be caught dead listening or reading that kind of thing. So that's
a broader
that's
audience.
The goal. Yeah.
And when you say not caught dead, I love I think you summed it up once. You said the type of people out in nature who wouldn't be caught dead touching bear droppings with a 10-foot pole or something like that. The people that maybe aren't climbing the high peaks or camping in the backcountry,
right.
but can appreciate and love nature and certainly love the podcast that you do.
Well, thanks.
As we're talking today, your new book is out.
It is.
You have written a number of books in the past about your work as a naturalist and also John Burroughs, the writer and naturalist from back during the conservation movement back in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And Henry Hudson, you wrote a novel.
Well, I haven't found a publisher for that one
But
yet, but yes, I have. Yeah.
And this new book that is out this month, Adirondack Life and Wildlife in the Wild, Wild East. This is a book that you've been working on for a number of years.
Yes, ever since I moved, became a year-rounder in the Adirondacks in 1999, so I guess that makes it almost 15 years I've been working on this book, and it's exciting to finally have it out.
It looks at your family's history, your history on the plot of land where you are, the 18 acres along the Saranac River in upstate New York in the Adirondack Park. You mentioned you moved there in the late 90s, in 1999, and you and your wife Debbie, what was it that made you decide to move here to the Adirondack Park and then to move into that old camp?
Well, we were looking for paradise, I guess, which everybody is. We wanted to live in a place where we could have wildness all around us. We're both naturalists and love wild places and wildlife and nature, and but unlike maybe some people with that bent, we weren't misanthropes. We didn't want to get away from people. We love people too. So we wanted to live in a community where we could have a rich community life with our fellow human beings, but also have lots of non-human living things around us. And we lived in a lot of places, from the deep south and Maine for a while.
You were National Park Ranger up there.
National Park Ranger on and off, and Ithaca, New York for a little while. But finally we found what we were looking for in Bloomingdale, our little town in the Adirondacks. And we live in a really rich community, but we're surrounded by thousands of acres of wild land.
And as you mentioned, just a stone's throw from Saranac Lake, really, but you get off the beaten path and quite quickly you're truly out in nature.
Yes, so we sort of have our cake and eat it too. That's the way we look at it, although we pay a price for it at times. It's black fly season this time of year, and the biting insects at our house they're in epic proportions.
You write, as we mentioned, about your family's history, how you moved into this camp along the Saranac, leaky roof and all, and backed up plumbing and everything else, and all that you went through to turn this into your year-round residence. You had a lot of roommates when you first started, hundreds of both living and dead mice.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Hundreds of living and dead mice, and we had a bear in the house once, and
the neighbor came over to visit the bear.
A squirrel, yeah. So we've had lots of wildlife inside and outside.
And it is a great read because you talk about everything that went into restoring this camp. It was old and decrepit, and you turned it into your family's home, and then you talk about raising your two children and the years that you have spent there living.
Thanks.
And then as you get the house in order, it allows you to then explore. Is it 18 acres that you have of flora and fauna all around you? For you, this obviously, you write about your discoveries as the years go on of this wonderful place where you're living.
I do, yeah. One thing that we decided to do early on when we got the place is we thought we'd been critical in the past, hopefully not hypercritical, but fairly so, what people do with their land. So we thought, well, now we have to step up to the plate and try to live on this piece of land as honorably and as we can, and as conducive to not only our happiness but to the well-being of the other living things that have been living there a lot longer than we had. So we launched a biological survey on our property. We decided to try to identify, and it's impossible, but we decided to try anyhow and have a lot of fun in the process, identify every living thing on the place. So we jumped in identifying wildflowers and trees and birds, reptiles, amphibians, and mammals, and stuff that we could work on fairly easily. Over time, we needed more and more help with groups like earthworms. We have a friend who's an entomologist who, particularly these days, works on biting insects. So he's helped us identify the species of mosquito, black fly, deer fly, and no-see-em we have at our place. So it's really been a fun project. And raising kids in the middle of this project has been great too, because our kids are learning science. They're 9 and 10 right now. They know how to use a microscope, and they can sit down with me and work their way through a key and identify a beetle that we found. And so they're growing up as I've wanted them to see that science isn't some dry esoteric thing that maybe you study in a cement block building. Science is red-blooded and exciting and fun, and it's all basically mystery work, really, detective work.
More species than you expected when you first moved there? Have you discovered much more than you anticipated?
I don't think we really had any particular expectation, but I mean, the more you get into it, the more you realize the potential is. It's almost overwhelming. We have had some neat surprises. We had a meadowlark once, which is a bird of big, wide open places, and there it was in our little patch of woods in the Adirondacks, in a meadowlark perched in the top of a balsam fir tree. So just sort of the classic North American bird of the wide open grasslands perched on top of the classic tree of the northern forest. So it was a neat juxtaposition. Once we were on the bridge over the Saranac River in front of our house, and my wife said, "What's that?" And she looked up. She's a better shorebird expert than I am. She grew up on the Connecticut coast, and the bird flying overhead was a surf scoter, a sea duck. And but they winter to the north and come to and from and fly over the Adirondacks sometimes.
So
our record
totally
isn't the first one, not totally unheard of, but still it was pretty darn exciting. So there are kooky things like that have really been fun to find.
That's like the folks in Vermont who had the brown pelican visit a couple of weeks
That's
ago,
right.
a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
Very not unheard of, but very unusual, especially inland. So
Yeah.
it's always fun to have surprises like that. And speaking of surprises, you did mention you had the bear that helped themselves crashing through the screen of your back door and onto the back porch. And
Yep, that was a little bit of a surprise, but it was sort of exciting after the thrill was over to add a bear to our house list. We have a list of the things that we've seen in the house, and bear was probably an animal we didn't expect to get indoors.
now, when you first talked about moving back moving to the Adirondack Park, your family has roots here, long
Yes.
roots, deep roots. Your great-great-great-great-grandfather
Yes, four greats. Yeah.
in the southern Adirondacks around Northville and Wells and Hope and in that area. So they were truly pioneers, some of the first pioneers of the Adirondacks.
They were, yeah. Daniel Brownell, the great-great-great-great-grandfather, he was town clerk of his township down there when George Washington was still president. So that puts it back a ways.
It does. Did that play a significant role in your decision to move to the Adirondacks, that your family history was so deep here?
It did. I've always been drawn to the place because of the roots here, and the roots of other members of the family are all in Europe. So this is the one place in North America where we go way back. And also my hero of my childhood was my mother's father, my grandfather, Grampy we called him, and he was from the Adirondacks, lived his whole life here. Traveled a little bit, but not much. He was a very local guy. He was mayor of Northville, his town, for much of his life, and he was just my hero as a kid. He was the happiest man I knew. I think he loved life, and he lived a life of great public service as mayor and police chief of his little town. He was always doing things for people and for family members too. But at the same time, he was also knew sort of how to be irresponsible at times in a constructive way and go off and have a good time. And for him, that meant mainly fishing and hunting.
Yeah.
And I used to get to go on a week to 2 week long fishing trip with him every summer, and it was just a life-changing, those trips were life-changing adventures for me.
And you write a lot about him in the book. In fact, you write about how he was ready to go on one of those trips when he passed away, and how hard that was. You were up in Maine at the time.
I was, and he died and keeled over in his beloved Adirondack woods, and I wind up the book actually with a true story of my wife and I going back and trying to find that spot and actually find the exact point on the earth where his life ended, and we did. It was very emotional for me, and that's one thing about this book that's a big departure for me. Is in the past, I've, like many nature writers, particularly the older ones, who I've read a lot of, I've put nature in the foreground, and I've sort of hidden behind the bush while I write about it. But a lot of nature writing these days, the writer is in the forefront, and the intersection of human life and wildlife mingle. And I decided I really wanted to try to do that kind of book too. So this is my attempt at trying to mix the story of my life with stories of wildlife.
And I think the readers will enjoy that, especially everything when it comes to the house, all of the projects on the house and everything you did on the camp, turning that into your year-round residence. I think they'll appreciate that.
Well, thanks, Tom. Yeah, the book overlaps several genres, really. It says it's a memoir on the cover, and it is a memoir of my life. It's also very much a nature book. And it's also, one classic genre is couple buys an old house in the country and practically goes broke and get divorced fixing it up. And this book fits squarely in that genre too.
Yeah. You have written about John Burroughs, and early on in the book you talk about the two different philosophies of the two famous Johns, as they were known, back during the conservation movement, Muir and Burroughs. And you sort of are following the Burroughs philosophy, where you're living in and among nature with everything around you, not necessarily preserving it like a national park and worried that you're going to mess it up, but getting right in there and experiencing it.
Yeah, Burroughs' philosophy was very much that we are part of nature, we come from nature, we're rooted in it, and I think it's he was from New York State, and I think when the Adirondack Park was created, probably indirectly, that philosophy sort of seeped into the legislation that made this park. And so unlike the big parks of this type out west, which are national parks, in those parks the people were expelled from them when the parks were created. At least they were for the most part. So Indians were driven out, and other people had their land taken by eminent domain, and many of them were paid, some of them were not. And so the general trend in the creation of the national parks was that to protect nature, you've got to get rid of people. That nature really don't belong, that people don't really belong in nature. And the Burroughs philosophy was very much that we are grounded in nature and we are a part of it. And as I look at the challenges we face as a culture today and look into the future, I see a rosier future if we continue to focus on the fact that we are a part of this whole picture. We're not isolated. Nature is not a museum that we go to visit and then we go back to where we came from. Nature is where we live. Everything is natural, ultimately, in Burroughs' view and mine, too.
And the Adirondack Park would have been an experiment he would have loved and endorsed. 6 million acres of private and public land, people staying in there, living, coexisting.
Yeah, this neat relationship between John Burroughs and the Adirondack Park. People ask me sometimes, what influence did he have on it? We just sort of covered that a little bit. His philosophy sort of permeates the shape that this park took. But also, the Adirondack Mountains had a huge influence on John Burroughs. The influence went the other way. And as a young man in 1863, he'd been school teaching for many years. He was really sort of a lost soul. He really didn't quite know what to do with himself. He'd quit his last school teaching job. He wanted to be a writer. He didn't quite know how to make that happen. He was relatively poor, grew up on a farm in the Catskills. And he came up here on a camping trip. He wrote a beautiful essay about it in 1863. And I like to say he walked into the woods a young man who didn't know what to do with his life. And he walked out of the woods the nature writer that we know and that made such important contributions the rest of his life. So he sort of found his calling here in the North Woods.
And you can relate to that.
I can.
We talked about some of the podcast. You're now, over the next month or two, I think they're going to be on our website in August and September, creating some videos. The segment's called Curiously Adirondack.
Yes.
And basically video segments of many of the similar topics to your podcast.
Yeah, it's a great project to be working on. It's a pleasure to always be involved with Mountain Lake PBS, and my producer friend Josh Clement, who's also my neighbor, is very talented at all the things that I'm clueless about behind the camera and the editing, and he's great on camera too. But we have a great collaboration, so we're going to make 8 short films. We've got a grant from PBS, and we're going to be doing some crowdfunding to make it happen too. And there'll be short films. They'll be, I think, quirky. And but we intend to capture bits and pieces of the unique flavor of life in the Adirondack Park.
Fantastic. That crowdfunding already underway, kicking off July 1st, Indiegogo. And we'll put that up if folks want to see where they can go get more information on that. So this is a matching PBS grant,
right,
raising some money to go with that. So on video, viewers will not only be able to hear that wonderful voice, but now be able to see you as well.
Well, thanks. It's great fun.
You have done a couple. The earthworms, when Colgate University
Yes.
came and invaded your property in search of the invasive earthworm. There was a video segment on that. And then also the black flies, that grand experiment to try to figure out how many species of black flies you have on your property. That was also a fun video segment as well.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun with that when we wove in a bit of Joseph Conrad and Alfred Hitchcock and all sorts of stuff, and got out there and fed a few black flies while we made the film.
Wonderful. So that will be on our website in August and September, 8 of those segments, and all folks can look forward to that. They can find out more information on our website at mountainlake.org. Also, your book available at most bookstores in the Adirondacks and beyond.
Yes, and on the web too. SUNY Press is the publisher, State University of New York Press, and they have a website too. And Amazon, all the usual outlets will sell the book, and I'll be making the rounds promoting it this summer.
Fantastic. Adirondack Life and Wildlife in the Wild, Wild East, out now. And Ed Kanze, thanks a lot for taking the time to come by and see us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom. Always a pleasure.